You're listening to the Mommy Labor Nurse Podcast, episode number 42. All right, so last week's episode was titled, Has Liesl had the baby yet? Maybe. And this week's episode is, Liesl has definitely had the baby, but not yet when I'm recording this intro. Still pregnant, guys. It is Monday, a week before this episode is supposed to come out. So I'm 43 today, but I would hope by 41 and 3 I've had the baby. So yeah, that's what's going on. But yeah, 40 and 3 today. It's frustrating because I went into labor at 40 and 3 with Walter, and I delivered him in the early morning of 40 and 4. So, kind of went the second one. You're thinking that, okay, probably going to not be that long, but I guess it could be. But yeah, here I am sitting at 40 and 3 and no baby, but all good. If you're in my same situation or you've been in my same situation, you understand how frustrating it is. Whenever people are asking you things and just, everybody's just on the edge of their seat. So yeah, but enough about that. I would hope that when this episode is airing that my baby, maybe I'll be at the hospital, maybe I'll be at home. I don't know. But it's a week from today. I'm trying to stay positive, guys. So today we are doing a birth story with my friend Ashley. She came onto the Mommy Labor Nurse podcast I recorded with her a few months back during all of the lockdown stuff. I was at home recording my episode with her, and she had a very unique birth story. So she's had 3 children, and we talked about all 3 of those, and she's had a variety of different stories. With her first one, she was diagnosed with pregnancy-induced hypertension at 24 weeks, put on bed rest at 28 weeks, and then induced at 36 weeks when her blood pressure spiked really, really high. And she was also diagnosed with preeclampsia at that time. And then during that labor, baby turned breech while she was actually in labor, so she ended up having a C-section with that one. The next one, she was diagnosed, same thing, pregnancy-induced hypertension at 32 weeks. She had a little bit of complications at 34 weeks. Her fundal heights weren't measuring by ultrasound. And her baby actually got diagnosed with IUGR, which is intrauterine growth restriction, if you've heard me talk about that. It's basically where the placenta isn't exactly giving baby enough nutrients, and it can cause baby to kind of grow a little bit smaller. So she was induced with that pregnancy at 37 weeks, and she had a successful VBAC, but baby was tiny, 4 pounds, almost 5 pounds. And then her most recent child, who is 6 months old, I'm sure he's probably 8 months old now, she was again diagnosed with pregnancy-induced hypertension, but not until 35 weeks with this one. And with that baby, she was induced at 37 weeks due to the preeclampsia. His head actually was kind of sideways, so he kind of got stuck in the process. She had a vacuum extraction with him, and he was finally born vaginally, but he wasn't breathing so well and needed some resuscitation afterwards. And then he also had what's called a large hematoma on his head, and even, she said, a possible fracture on his skull, which was really scary. She definitely had some issues with him because of that. So his hematoma, that big old hematoma, is basically just like a big collection, like a big bruise almost, collection of blood. It was so bad on his head that it actually caused him to have a whole lot of jaundice. And so he had to stay in the hospital for a while because of his bilirubin. His bilirubin was really, really high. He almost had to have blood transfusions. So she talks about, she's just got it all. She's got a lot to talk about. So I wanted to have her on because she just, had an array of things going on with her, a lot of different outcomes. And thought it was a really interesting story for you guys to listen to. So without further ado, let's get into Ashley's story.
You're listening to the Mommy Labor Nurse Podcast, where we firmly believe in the power of education when it comes to giving birth. Tune in each week as we dive into pregnancy-related topics, expert interviews, and a variety of birth stories. As a reminder, anything you hear on this podcast is not medical advice. Please see mommylabornurse.com/disclaimer for more details. And now here's your host, educator, registered nurse, and fellow mom, Liesl Teen.
Hi, Ashley. Welcome to the Mommy Labor Nurse podcast. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. Can you just start by telling our listeners a little bit about yourself and your family, where you're from, all that good stuff?
Yeah, so I was born and raised in Colorado. Now I live in Columbus, Ohio. I have 3 children. So I have Ellie, who's 6, Lucy, 4, and Ryan just turned 1 last week.
Awesome. So you're busy.
Yeah, pretty busy.
Cool. Well, we are doing a birth story today, guys, and I'm happy if you want to talk. I know all of your birth stories had a similar theme, right?
Yes.
So I'm happy if you want to just kind of go through all of them. I mean, we have a while, so you can just kind of start. I usually tell people to kind of start with way back when you kind of found out you were pregnant with your first one, and if you had any fertility issues or anything with that pregnancy, and then yeah, we can go into your second and your third. So yeah, let's go back to pregnancy number 1.
Yeah, so pregnancy number 1, we pretty much got pregnant right away. Wasn't too much of a challenge, but I started having some serious cramping around 6 weeks. And so called the doctor. They did a progesterone test and found that my progesterone level was really low. So they put me on progesterone pills for the next, I believe, 6 weeks it was.
Okay.
Anyway, so yeah, it was like my body was like, oh, you don't have enough progesterone. It's kind of like I was going to start having a miscarriage, but luckily we stopped that.
Oh, good. Good.
Yeah. And then when I was about 24 weeks pregnant, my blood pressure shot up. And so they started monitoring me a bit more. And then at 28 weeks, my doctor put me on bed rest due to preeclampsia and gestational hypertension, which, I mean, I was glad I didn't have any other kids, but bed rest is hard.
Yeah, no kidding. I mean, especially I feel like it's even harder when you're pregnant too.
Yeah.
Like you think you just want to rest all the time when you're pregnant, but it's not fun just laying in. I mean, I've been like, I was kind of sick last week, and I was just kind of laying in the bed for 2 days. I'm like, I just can't get comfortable. How do people do this for weeks?
Yeah. That is the main problem, was I couldn't do anything except pretty much get up to pee.
Yeah.
But it's like, you're not comfortable laying in certain positions. And so then you keep tossing and turning. And my husband would leave me a cooler next to the couch with food so that I'd have food before he left for work. But it was awful. And I had severe morning sickness with her. And so it was also like, okay, I'm bed rest, but also wanting to puke all the time. So yeah, it was not fun. So then we started doing twice weekly appointments and doing NSTs throughout all of my appointments. And she was doing okay, like baby was doing fine, but my blood pressure just kept increasing. It was getting to like 200 over 110. And then I think it got even higher than that. It kept increasing my medication until finally my doctor said, I cannot increase your medication any longer.
Yeah.
And so that's when she sent me to the hospital. I mean, before that, she pretty much sent me to the hospital every week for them to monitor me for the preeclampsia.
Yeah.
But finally at this point, she was like, nope, we're going to take this baby. So I was 36 weeks.
Okay.
And they gave me steroids to help with lung development. And they actually gave those to me when I was about 30 weeks because I was always in the hospital and they just didn't know.
Yeah, that's common. They do that.
Yeah. The induction process and labor, she decided to flip to breech. And so by the time they just like her heart rate started dropping, and so they came in and they discovered she was breech, but I was dilated at an 8 already, and she was already starting to move down the birth canal.
Not a great time to find out your breech.
No, it was not a great time. So yeah, they had to rush me in for a C-section, and just the emotions when you weren't planning at all to have a C-section. Like I didn't even think that was the route I was going to go down, especially because I was already induced.
Yeah, no, exactly. I mean, when they tell you one thing and then all of a sudden, like in a few minutes, it's like, oh, wait a second, you gotta completely switch your mind this way. Yeah, no, that's tough for anybody to handle.
Yeah, it was a lot of emotions going through my mind. I was hyperventilating.
Yeah.
They were like, you have to calm down. We're going to have to knock you out because your heart rate's not doing well.
Yeah.
The C-section went fine. Everything went fine. They took my daughter to the nursery for a little bit to monitor her. And she wasn't really crying much, but she was breathing. And my husband went with her, and he said it was interesting because you couldn't really hear her. It was just like a squeaking because she was so tiny.
Yeah.
But she didn't have any NICU time at all, which was awesome. And I was finally able to see her after like that recovery time. But it really messed with like the breastfeeding process, because they did give her bottles in the hospital because she was 5 pounds. And so they wanted to make sure that she was gaining before she left. And that just kind of just made it so that she just wanted bottles.
Yeah.
So
yeah, that's common. Just the nipple confusion up front, and it didn't help that she was smaller. Her gestation, like she was only 36 weeks. Her mouth wasn't huge. Like she was already they started with the bottles early, so she was already kind of used to like, okay, this is a bottle. I'm used to a bottle. I don't have any interest in breastfeeding. So yeah, makes sense.
Yeah. So that was the recovery from the C-section. Not the best. And after that, just like mentally, I had to recover from the C-section, but also physically. So after that, I really started researching VBACs because I just wanted to avoid another C-section if I could. For sure. So I started researching VBACs, made sure that I didn't get pregnant too soon, so that I had enough time in between my C-section. And so then when we decided we were ready for another, again, we got pregnant right away. And this time things are going pretty good. I got, to like 24 weeks and there's no problems. And so we just kind of went about doing my regular appointments until I hit 34 weeks. And then I had a sinus infection actually. So I went to my regular doctor and they said, do you know what your blood pressure is? And so that's when I called my OB, because my blood pressure again went up. So they started monitoring me again with NSTs. And at 35 weeks, my measurements were off on my uterine measurements. And so they decided to do an ultrasound. And on the ultrasound, they found that my daughter was IUGR. And so they were like, we're just going to monitor you closely, come in, twice a week again, do NSTs, make sure everything's okay. But at 36 weeks, her heart rate was awful.
Yeah.
And so, so they admitted me to the hospital again. And while I was there, they managed to get her heart rate back to normal. So my doctor told me, I'm going to give you until you are exactly 37 weeks, and then we're going to induce you.
Yeah.
Because unfortunately, my daughter, again, flipped to breech while I was in the hospital at 36 weeks.
Oh, come on.
No, it's crazy. Like I went in and she was not breech. And then there was this time that they couldn't find her heartbeat. And sure enough, it was like.
She was breech. It was like way up. Yeah.
Yep. And so my doctor said, I will give you until Saturday to get her to switch.
Yeah.
And then we'll have to think about what to do. But luckily, she did flip back, head down.
Yeah.
And so, I was like, you have to be kidding me.
Yeah, for real.
How is this happening again? So with her, so they induced me with Pitocin only. And actually the hospital had never done an induced VBAC before. So
guinea pig.
Yeah. So I had to wait till they like typed up the legal paperwork
Oh my
and
gosh.
everything. Yeah, it was kind of crazy.
Now, let me ask you one question
Yeah.
that I was thinking of with your first one too. Did you have to stay? I know you said with your first one, you were kind of in and out of the hospital, like you got sent to the hospital a lot of the time for your blood
Yeah.
pressures. Did you have to stay inpatient a whole lot? Or was it just
No.
that you got sent and they monitored it and then you got sent home?
Yeah, I was usually there for a day or two, and then they
Okay.
sent me home.
Okay.
Especially with my first, I was usually there for 2 days, and then I
Gotcha.
would go home for about a week, and then come back for 2 days.
Yeah.
And with my
times.
second, with my second, I was just there for the day.
Yeah. Okay.
When they finally got her heart rate stable.
Gotcha.
And so I went home for that week and just like walked a lot, trying to get her head down. And then, so they started the induction with Pitocin. And there was a while that I just stalled at a 5. And so there was a while that they were like, we might have to do another C-section. But this is where I have to thank every labor and delivery nurse. Because my nurse was amazing and
Good.
pulled out like every trick in the book that she could and got me fully dilated, and it was amazing.
That's awesome.
So my daughter, as I was pushing, her heart rate dropped again.
Yeah.
So they used the vacuum to get her out. And she was even smaller than they predicted. She was 4 pounds, 14 ounces at 37 weeks.
Yeah. So that's a typical IUGR baby. Sometimes it's hard to understand true IUGR from just having like a small baby. It's much different than just having like IUGR is truly where they're not growing because they're not getting enough nutrients, like something's wrong with placenta, or, obviously in your case it was probably hypertension related where like, the blood flow wasn't completely, going great through your placenta. So it was nourishing baby. But it's, much different than just having like, quote unquote, like a small baby. But yeah, that sounds like a IUGR baby to me. 4 pounds.
Yeah,
37 weeks.
Yeah, it was kind of crazy that she was even smaller than my first.
Yeah.
And she was actually very healthy. They didn't have to send her to the NICU either.
Oh, good.
It was quite amazing. It was just amazing the difference in my birth experiences with those two.
Yeah.
Because after the C-section, I had this like wallowing mourning period.
Uh-huh.
But after my second daughter, I was elated, and it was just like this instant bonding with her. And she got a breastfeed right away. She got to, everything was just
even at that tiny, she was able to breastfeed. Wow, that's great.
She was amazing. I was surprised. She was my champion.
She's a little fighter. She's like, I wasn't getting enough inside, but now I'm going to do everything I can to get to grow on the outside. Oh, that's great.
Yeah. So, she's still tiny now, smaller than her friends, but she's feisty. So
that's great.
After that, my husband and I were both kind of like, okay, we need if this is how it's going to be every time, maybe we should think about it again. So with my son, when we got pregnant with him, I started on baby aspirin.
Okay.
And he was like the one pregnancy where he was completely fine. So they kept monitoring me just to make sure because of the IUGR history. But he was totally fine. My blood pressure went up a little bit, but it wasn't to the point where I needed medication.
Good.
So it was gestational hypertension, but it wasn't like severe.
Yeah, that's great. And remind me, I know you obviously needed the medication with the first one to where they kind of maxed you out. And that's very common for anybody who's listening, who's like experiencing, not common in terms of you're maxing out on your medication. We don't, most people don't get to that point, but that's kind of what they try to do, instead of just saying, okay, we got to induce at, super, super early. They try to get you as long as they can. But remind me, with your second one, did they have to do that as well to basically max out your medication?
They did not actually.
Okay. Gotcha.
Yeah, that was more the IUGR that was the problem.
Yeah. No, it makes sense. Okay, sorry. Go back to your son.
So they monitored me just to make sure that everything was going fine. Yeah. His growth was fine. We had extra ultrasounds just to make sure.
Yeah, good.
He was completely in the 50th percentile, completely normal. But because of my hypertension, they were monitoring me a little closely. So again, I was induced at 37 weeks with him because my blood pressure skyrocketed in that last couple of days right before he was born.
Yeah.
So I was in the hospital like 2 days before he was born.
So maybe your body's just like, hey, we can't do a full turn. We got it. We're done at 37 weeks with all of these pregnancies. Yeah.
I know. It's like, I don't think I'll ever make it to like 40 weeks.
Probably not.
So they induced me that time with a Foley bulb.
Uh-huh.
And it was a huge difference in the process. I really like the Foley bulb a lot better than the Pitocin.
Oh, you're probably the first one to say that.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Most people hate those things. Well, see, it might be a little bit different. You're saying you never got Pitocin at all with him?
I did afterwards.
Okay, yeah, because it's very different. With like a first-time mom, Foley bulbs are super common because your cervix is usually more closed when you're a first-time mom, so they're more likely to need something in addition to Pitocin. But yeah, most people hate them. Man, you must have gotten a good one that like was in just the right place and wasn't affecting you too much.
Yeah, I couldn't, like when they first put it in, it was uncomfortable, but after that, I didn't really feel anything until it fell out. So
good.
Yeah, it was just like a much faster process than the Pitocin.
Good.
But I was also with a more supportive hospital this time around. So that made a huge difference because I moved to Ohio and found a really supportive hospital and doctor, and
that makes a huge difference.
Yeah. So he, so with his, I again stalled in labor, but I was at a 9 with the lip, and he just wasn't moving down. And so there was a moment they actually had my husband was fully dressed to go do a C-section. They had shaved me. Everything was like ready to go. They were starting to wheel me down because his heart rate had dropped. When it went back up, that was when they turned off the Pitocin. And then they're like, okay, we can't give you Pitocin anymore, but you're at a 9, so hopefully
maybe your body will just do it. Yeah.
And it did not. So the doctor wanted to put a contraction monitor internally, and while he was trying to do that, he asked me to like push down so that he could get his hand in, and it totally like pushed the baby down then I fully like dilated. So
there you go.
Yeah, he was like, all right, let's do this. But the baby would not budge. I was pushing for 2 hours and he would not move. Finally, we got to the point where he was out enough that the doctor could use the vacuum. But the vacuum, he had to use several times. The baby still wasn't budging.
Yeah.
I think he used it about 20 times until finally the baby turned his head.
Yeah.
What the doctor thinks happened was the baby's head was turned sideways. And so he just wouldn't.
Perfect reason why many moms push for that length of time. It's not because the baby's too big. You think like, oh, my baby's too big, that's why I push for so long. No, it's usually just because baby's head is kind of turned in a funky way, and you're just, if you think about, it's like just hitting a brick wall. You know what I mean? It's like a square piece into a circle try to, just trying to like get it in a way that it's not like right there. Like it just needs to turn a little bit and then we're good. And then we can go forward. So that makes sense to me that they said that to you.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense because I do remember asking him, like, can I, like, if my baby is bigger, is this not going to happen? He goes, no, it wasn't the size of your baby. So finally his head came out and he came out, but so because they used the vacuum so many times, he had a giant hematoma on his head. Yeah, oh my gosh, it felt so bad. And then he also wasn't breathing really well.
Gotcha.
So they had to put him on the CPAP machine for a little bit, just because, he wasn't really breathing. And with that bruise, they were a little concerned. So they actually took him, when we got up to postpartum, they actually took him away because they were concerned that he had a fracture on his head.
Oh.
And they didn't bring him back for like hours. I was like, okay, what's happening? But so it was just that hematoma was so bad and he had a small fracture in his head because of how many times we had to use vacuum on him.
Right.
But it also gave me PTSD because
I can imagine.
Yeah. Well, and the doctor like kept sticking his hand up, I mean, it makes sense. He did everything he needed to do, but my epidural didn't work at that point. So, like I got the epidural, but it didn't work at all. Like when I needed it to work. And so I just had PTSD after that. He, had to be in the hospital for a week because his bilirubin levels shot up to 24. Which they almost put him in the ICU because once it got to 25, that's when they were like, we're going to have to do ICU because of that hematoma, and his body was like, just couldn't break it down.
And how big was he? Remind me.
He was 6 pounds, 14 ounces.
So he was your biggest baby, but still little. And I mean, if people, it's kind of hard to explain, but it's just babies don't have a lot of blood because they're so tiny. So like if you have this big hematoma where all this blood has kind of rushed to and all of these lysed, blood cells are up here, it can really like shoot up your bilirubin levels. And I'm sure he was super yellow when he saw him. But no, that's no fun. Well, I'm glad that did he ever get to that point where he had to go to the ICU?
He didn't. There were twice they almost took him, but luckily, after adding an IV, he started slowly working his way back to normal. So
good.
But so it was just kind of crazy. I was like, it's interesting because I felt like it was the easiest birth, but then it turned out to be the hardest. And easiest pregnancy, but his was the recovery for me was even harder than the C-section. And so it's kind of weird because I thought the C-section recovery would be the hardest, but for him, it wasn't like physically, I was fine.
Right.
It wasn't the physical recovery. It was more like I was in the hospital with him, so I couldn't focus on myself. And had to make sure he was okay. And I was pumping and I was, breastfeeding and I was, trying to get all that done while he was in the hospital. So it's just kind of crazy, but
probably not as physically hard to recover from, but just emotionally very, very hard to recover from.
Right.
Yeah. No, that makes total sense. And I think they never had to give him a blood transfusion or anything for that hematoma.
Right. They almost did. When we first got there, they were like, we might have to, let's give him some time, but luckily they didn't. So
that's good. That's good. All right. So you said he was in there for a week and then coming home, how was your experience with him?
He was actually an amazing baby.
Good.
I couldn't have asked for a better third child.
Yeah.
Because my second, she had colic and it was really hard having a 2-year-old who didn't quite understand what was going on, and then a colicky baby.
Yeah.
But this time around, I had a 6-year-old, or well, she was 5 at the time. But she was super helpful.
Yeah.
Like understood, like both of them understood what a baby was and to be gentle. And it was huge, like, help to have older kids.
Yeah.
But it was really nice. He's just really quiet, doesn't really cry a lot. He's really happy.
Yeah.
So bringing him home was like night and day difference from bringing my second home. So.
Well, I'm glad that at least you had that experience to kind of make up for the traumatic experience that you had in the hospital. That really worked out.
It did. It was really nice. I was like, okay, I'll take this trade-off.
Yeah, no, that's great. And were you able to breastfeed him as well?
I was. I actually just stopped at a year.
Cool.
Yeah, he actually did not do very well while we were in the hospital, but after that he really took to it.
Understandable.
Yeah. Well, his head really hurt,
Yeah.
But yeah, he was my rock star, like just breastfed up into a year.
Yeah.
And I actually was pumping just to like have a stash, and he never needed it. So I donated over 1,500 ounces to the milk bank.
That's great. That's so great.
So yeah,
we're able to do that.
Yeah. So yeah, it just made me feel like, I'm doing something. I couldn't do that with my first. And we needed a lot of help with her, just in, like, she just had a really hard time breastfeeding. And so I was like, at least I can donate to someone else.
Yeah. No, that's great.
So it made me feel good.
I do have one question before we wrap up. Did you ever have to go on magnesium for any of your births? So were they ever like, we need to put you on IV magnesium?
I did not.
Okay. Okay.
Which was really surprising with my first. Yeah. I was surprised. But
yeah, not even a preventative, because at my hospital, I know they do that a lot. Just even a preventative, like 12-hour magnesium drip, where it's like, okay, we're, you're not dilated, but we're thinking maybe things are trending in this direction. But that's good, because magnesium, that's a common thing that I think if people are listening who are having a similar experience with pregnancy-induced hypertension, you're thinking about it might be preeclampsia, they would put you on a medication called magnesium, where it just doesn't make you feel too good. It's like just an IV medication that makes you feel really hot and really tired and just really crappy. And you have to be impatient, obviously, when you get it. So I'm glad that you didn't have to do that as well. But I was just curious.
Yeah, it was
hypertension.
Yeah, I know. I was like, with how high everything got. Yeah, it was kind of surprising. They didn't put me on it with my first. But.
Yeah, good. And you obviously didn't. I mean, they weren't ever. It was really, truly just pregnancy-induced hypertension. They were never really concerned too much about preeclampsia, because you said you had that one sinus infection where you probably had a headache, and that could be a sign of preeclampsia. But I guess it really was just your blood pressures that they were concerned about. It's not like you had any lab elevations or, really, really bad headache or any of these other symptoms.
So with my first, I did get diagnosed with preeclampsia.
Gotcha.
My labs all came back high. I had the headaches. With my second, I actually felt really good. I didn't, like, none of my labs really came back concerning. With my son, however, like I said, everything with him was fine until a couple of days before.
Yeah.
And I had sudden weight gain, like I gained 10 pounds in 2 days.
Wow.
And like all the swelling, like I just all of a sudden got swollen. And then my urine started coming back a little bit higher in protein.
Yeah.
So that's when they were like, okay, we'll just induce you.
Kind of trending towards that. Yeah. No, that makes sense. That makes sense. All right, cool. Well, thank you so much for coming on. I know you're on Instagram. Can you just remind listeners, if they want to follow you, want to see any pictures that you post or anything like that, where they can find you?
Yeah. My Instagram handle is the Boyd Tales.
Okay.
Just spelled like Boyd, Boyd. And I'm currently private, but I'll change it to public.
No, it's okay, but you're fine. If anybody wants to request and follow you, it might be any random people want to request and follow you. That's probably where they came from, the podcast. So awesome. Well, thank you so much. I think this was a good episode, good pregnancy-induced hypertension, chocked full episode.
Yeah.
Because you had three very, very hypertensive experiences. So I think it can help anybody who's kind of going through a similar experience. So thank you.
Thank you.
Are you looking for birth education? Did you know that I have 2 fabulous birth courses that are super affordable? Well, I do. Head over to mommylabornurse.com/podcast to take a short quiz to see which birth class is for you. When you purchase either birth course, you'll have full access to it forever. And that means it will never expire and you can access it throughout any stage of your pregnancy or for any subsequent pregnancies that you have. You'll also gain free access to my Facebook group, linked to the class, where you can ask questions about your pregnancy, share your birth story after you give birth, read other people's birth stories, and get to know other members who are in the course. There is also a money-back guarantee, so if you are at all unsatisfied with your purchase, please send me an email at hello@mommylabornurse.com for a full refund. There's really no risk to signing up, and I promise you will learn a ton about what's to come when you give birth. As a listener of this podcast, you automatically get 20% off any purchase if you use the code PODCASTLISTENER. I've had tons of moms just like you enter these birth courses and have fabulous, wonderful, empowering births because they feel so much more educated about what's to happen. So if you are at all curious about birth education, again, I encourage you to go to mommylabornurse.com/podcast and use the code PODCASTLISTENER to save 20%. All right, so that is it for this episode of the Mommy Labor Nurse podcast. You probably follow me on Instagram because that's probably where you came from. But if you don't, head over to Instagram and follow me at mommy.labornurse for more. That is certainly where I am most active. I also now have a separate Instagram for just this podcast, so I encourage you to follow my second account at mommylabornurse.podcast as well if you want podcast updates. Again, that is at mommylabornurse.podcast. As always, you guys know that I also have a website where I have tons of articles all about pregnancy, birth, breastfeeding, newborn stuff, and more at www.mommylabornurse.com. I want to hear more from you on how much you love this episode of the podcast or how you think I can improve. So leave me a comment on one of my pictures, send me a DM, or send me an email with all the love. All right, guys, I will see you same time, same place next week.